What's up everyone, Soldier First Class here. In today's mission, we're going to talk about how many parts the Final Fantasy VII Remake will be split into. With an unknown amount of parts, fans have been speculating based on the original game and what the developers have given us, and the scope of the first part being only Midgar. With that being said, I want to take a deeper look and try to figure out how many parts there will be. A lot of people think that 3 parts makes the most sense, but I'm torn between 3 and 4. With the first part being Midgar only, it's tough to tell how much each part will be expanded and how many parts that expansion will create. I'm honestly leaning towards this game coming out in 4 parts. The original Final Fantasy VII has a lot of content, and the scope and scale of the story is much larger when brought into modern game design. Locations are bigger, voice acting takes longer, and content needs to be full and enjoyable. For this reason, I feel that 4 games would give us enough content without the need to cut content. If these are truly 40 to 60 hours like Katase claims, then we're looking at a potential 160 to 240 hours of content out of the remake as a whole. So let's first take a look at how stories are structured. Stories come in parts known as acts. Every movie, book, or video game with a story-based experience follows this basic structure. The first act is the beginning and the initial conflict in the story. It's typically the slowest of the 3 acts and features a lot of introductory elements in the story. There are a lot of minor conflicts here that set the tone for the second and third act. The second act is the build-up phase where a lot of major story-shaping events occur. In this act, we might see a major character death or a villain reveal themselves. The second act will contain breaks in the action, but will still be key in pushing the story forward. The beginning of this act is typically when the fallout of Act 1 is dealt with. The midway point of the second act is usually the big plot twist as well. This actually splits the second act into 2 parts, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. The third act is the grand finale, where more story-shaping events occur, but with less break in the action. Action is typically constant, and the final conflict is usually resolved. When we look at the Final Fantasy VII Remake in its current form, we already know the first act is taking place in Midgar. Midgar sets the tone for the rest of the story, and once it's complete, you realize that the world of Gaia is about to open up to you. In this opening act, you learn about Shinra, Avalanche, an introduction to Sephiroth, Aerith's heritage, and much more. Midgar is a major location, and if done properly, will really set the tone for future installments in this multi-game saga. So how does this affect the rest of the multi-game series? Because Midgar is part 1, and a lot of things will be revealed when it comes to story elements, part 2 will likely go until Aerith's death. You might be thinking, but how is this possible when Midgar was only a small percentage of the original story? While Midgar is always looked at as a minor beginner area, it's also the largest city in Final Fantasy VII. All of the locations you visit in the game, aside from Junon, Gold Saucer, and City of the Ancients, aren't jam-packed full of content. And even in these locations, a lot of this is just story content with side content wrapped around it. You could spend a few hours in these locations, or maybe only 30 to 40 minutes for story purposes. Even Calm, which holds one of the most key scenes in the entire game, is still fairly small when it comes to actual content. The caves and side areas don't provide much, but they do give us important story details and character exposition. Overall, the game doesn't really spend much time on story, it's mostly exploration, level and materia grinding, and doing side quests. With that being said, this means that the smaller areas of the game are only going to be a small fraction of the second and third part, and would allow them to reach far into the story without going too far. Aerith's death would be the best dropping off point for part 2 because of its impact on the story. This would also give the player another full game to bond with her whether or not they know her fate. With all the content between Calm and City of the Ancients, that's plenty of content for part 2, but also leaves enough content for part 3. It also leaves the player with a wow moment and anticipating the next installment. Let's take a look at some of the content we would see in part 2 of the remake. Gold Saucer and all of the things dealing with it, like dying in Coral Prison, meeting Yuffie and Vincent and exploring Wutai and Nibelheim, and then of course my favorite moment of Act 2, Red 13 and Cosmo Canyon. This would end with Aerith being lowered into the lake, the party leaving the City of the Ancients, and then we'd begin part 3. While story structure is that of 3 acts, the second act is split in half. This would allow them to make this game in 4 parts and still keep pacing properly. If you look at the chart here, the midway point of Act 2 splits the second act. While part 2 would be the first half of that, it would also provide the midway plot twist that is Aerith's death. This leaves part 3 to deal with the fallout of that event while still building towards the finale. This gives us part 3 beginning at the Icicle Inn and the second half of Act 2 beginning. This gives players another wealth of content to explore, including the Great Glacier, the Northern Crater for the first time, and the huge Materia quest. While this doesn't seem like a lot of ground to cover, these environments will also be in modern scale, and story expansion will be included as well. We'll be seeing a lot of the aftermath with Aerith's death, and seeing how it has affected all of the characters. As long as the developers can keep this part of the game interesting and fun, they should have no problem pulling this off for part 3. But this is where it gets interesting. Where should part 3 end? I think a likely jumping off point would be right before the Return to Midgar segment. They could end part 3 with Diamond Weapon, show the destruction caused by the Sister Ray, and the opening of the Northern Crater. Then part 4 would begin as preparations for the Midgar raid began. This opens up part 4 with an extremely exciting moment and a boss fight against Hojo. Imagine opening part 4, parachuting into Midgar, and facing off against Heidegger and Scarlet in the Proud Clawed. This would make for a very exciting third act of the story and provide a great starting area for the 4th part. We'd also get to see the famous Under the High Wind scene and the exposition that we all know and love. This would be an opportunity to expand on what the other characters did while they were away. Showing these characters making their peace with their potential fate, then coming together as friends again would be a great story element that was only glanced over in the original game. This would also be an opportunity to use the game's original side content as well. The Materia, Caves, and Knights of the Round, Ruby and Emerald Weapon, and maybe even a few newly added quests and story parts. Imagine using your powered up characters to take on Ruby and Emerald Weapon and seeing how truly powerful they've become. Then of course the final boss would be Sephiroth, and I'm excited to see how this segment is handled. The Northern Crater is the endgame dungeon and could become more of a maze, giving players a dungeon worth exploring. We'd also see parts where the characters make their peace with each other and prepare for the final battle against Sephiroth. I'm hoping that once Cloud and Sephiroth face off in Cloud's mind at the end, that the battle is more like the Xemnas battle in Kingdom Hearts 2 and less like a one-shot kill. It's a little anticlimactic to be able to kill Sephiroth with one basic attack. Even if the only requirement was to hit him with one Omni Slash, that battle would still be more entertaining and be a knockdown dragout until you reach your limit break. Now that we've covered all the different parts and how they could break down, let's take a look at another reason there could be 4 parts. In manga and anime, stories are told in terms known as story arcs. If you look at Dragon Ball Z for example, the full story is ongoing, but the stories are told in arcs or sagas. Each saga is its own self-contained story element with an overall conflict. So in Dragon Ball Z there was the Frieza saga or story arc. If we apply this to the remake, there are 4 major arcs in Final Fantasy VII's story. We have Midgar, the pursuit of Sephiroth to the City of the Ancients, the huge Materia, and the Northern Crater and final battle. Each arc has its own contained plotline, following the overall plotline of the game. They also all carry major events, keeping the story going and giving them a purpose for each arc. They also each contain a beginning, a middle, and an end, which transitions you to the next arc. So when you break the story itself into segments, this is the most likely split the remake will follow. Each part would also have new things to introduce, and not just story elements. Not only would players want to finish this multi-game saga, but each part would need another selling point besides just the story. Overall, while the developers themselves don't know how many parts there will be, we can still make educated guesses based on the content of the story and the potential side quests will be given. When it comes to strictly story content, it's likely the game will be 4 parts. Even side quests included, I don't see the game being in any more or less parts than 4. 4 parts gives them enough room to put every single aspect from the original, expand on those aspects in the remake style, and then provide side quests that are full and enjoyable. So what do you think, soldiers? How many parts will make up the multi-game saga of the Final Fantasy VII Remake? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to Omni-slash that like button. Let me know in the comments section below how many parts you think there will be in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell to join the ranks of Soldier today. And for all the latest Final Fantasy VII Remake content, I'm Soldier First Class, and I'm on to the next mission. Later, guys.